think he's not attending this evening. Then I'd, of course, like to welcome the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Heidi Hudson. Heidi, welcome. I'd like to welcome the Head of Department, Dr. Edwin du Plessis, also in front here. Edwin, thank you for joining us and welcome. Then, of course, the man of the moment I have to welcome, Professor, we're looking forward to your talk, Professor Fouché, and thank you for spending so much time and preparing it. We're definitely looking forward to what you have to say this evening. Then I would like to welcome the Professor Fouché's guests. So first, his wife, Rochelle Forster. Rochelle, can you show us where you are? Ah, they're sitting in front here. Welcome, Rochelle. It's good to have you here to support your husband. And then also Professor Fouché's two daughters are here, Liska and Emma Fouché, and I assume they're sitting in front here as well. So colleagues, so that you know who the family are and that you can also chat to them and acknowledge them. Then, of course, I'd like to welcome all of the staff members and all of the colleagues who are UFS members. Thank you for coming. To any students or postgraduate students who are here this evening, thank you for sharing this very special occasion with all of us. For those of you who are here from outside the university, I hope that you will enjoy this evening with us. I'd like to hand over to Professor Heidi Hudson, who will do the introductions of Professor Fouché. Heidi, thank you.
Good evening, colleagues, and thank you very much to Professor Vatoon for the welcome. And it is my privilege to introduce Professor Fouché to you. I think all of us know him, but tonight is his special night, and I think it's important to also celebrate his career. It's just a snapshot. It's a massive CV. I also worked through the CV and added a little bit because I think that he was modest, but here goes, a career that he can be proud of. Professor Fouché obtained his Bachelor of Social Science degree in 1989 from the UFS, his Bachelor of Social Science Honours degree cum laude from the UFS in 1990, and then the Master's degree in Social Science, also cum laude, in 1993 from the University of the Free State. In 1999, he was awarded his doctoral degree in psychobiography from the Nelson Mandela University. Paul Fouché has been employed at the university since 2007, and we all know that he is currently a professor in the Department of Psychology, but he's also a registered counselling psychologist with the HPCSA and an active member of the Psychological Society of South Africa. He's also an NRF-rated scholar, and as a research supervisor or co-supervisor, he's graduated 115 postgraduate students. And I think those of us who are involved in supervision will know how much effort and time went into that. He presented papers at 111 national and international conferences. Paul, and I can say that I counted them one by one on your CV. And over the span of his career, he published close to 60 publications. He served on the editorial committee of Acta Academica, was guest editor of the Journal of Psychology in Africa, and co-editor of special issues on psychobiography for the European Journal of Psychology. He also published 2 books by Springer. Finally, Paul is also the coordinator of the Bachelor of Psychology Honours Program, and he lectures in the Applied Masters Program. So first of all, I want to say thank you and congratulations. And then I want to say that we look forward to a fantastic lecture. I read the abstract and I think it promises fantastic insights. So enjoy, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Prof Vatoon, and thank you very much, Prof Hudson, for your introduction and your kind and inspiring words. Much appreciated from the heart. Ladies and gents, it's so nice to see you here tonight. I told so many people out there that because it's live streaming, you could have sat on a couch having a nice warm glass of wine or sherry and enjoying it from home. But the fact that you are here, I appreciate sincerely. So thank you so much for your presence. I'm very privileged to have you here. Yes, indeed, tonight we're going to be talking about the understanding of greatness, or the so-called illustrious personality, and we'll be doing that by dissecting the eminent personality through psychobiographical research. Before I get to that, I would also like to just welcome a few friends and fellow colleagues that I think need to be acknowledged as well. Thank you to the students who are also here. I see a few faces that are familiar. And then I also think there are other colleagues from other faculties, like Miranda Gous from Teaching and Learning, and then also Bridget Smith from the Health Systems Research. It's a pleasure to have you here as well. Thank you so much for being here. So before I kick off, and I'll keep it sweet and short tonight, I would just like to have a special word of thanks and welcoming to the following individuals. And I know Prof Vatoon has welcomed most of them, but I would like to welcome you as Vice Rector of Research at UFS. I think over the past few years you've done fantastic work enhancing our research profile internationally. And then, of course, the Dean, Prof Heidi Hudson, who has told me, if I may, that she only has 9 more months left in her position as the Dean of our faculty. I cannot believe the time has flown. Thank you for all your support through the years. Then the academic head of the department, Dr. Edwin du Plessis. Edwin, I appreciate it. I know that you had a long day, and tomorrow the same. And you just told me that usually you get home at night around 9 to 9:30. I know you have 2 daughters as well, and I think you would love to see them before they go to bed. So I'll finish before 9:30 tonight. Then just communication and marketing, especially Miss Alicia Pinar. And then the psychology and faculty colleagues, as well as the postgrad students in psychology. A very warm welcome to you. Also, our previous head of the department, Prof Karel Estreizer. Karel, I need to say thank you to you. Over the past 15 years of serving at UFS, you always supported me in my career, but particularly in my research career. And I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for that opportunity. Then Rochelle and my 2 daughters, Emma and Liska, and I'm going to say Liska and Emma as well, before a catfight might arise as to who gets prominence above the other. So welcome to all of you. I really appreciate that. Just some acknowledgements, and I need to give recognition to certain individuals. There are certain colleagues and students who have through the years left an academic footprint or a little fingerprint of inspiration and wisdom in my life as a psychobiographer. On an international and national level, I would like to start with Professor Rolf van Niekerk from the Nelson Mandela University, then Claude Meyer, Joe Pontorotto, Zoltan Kuvari. I want to flag you, those of you who are passionate about hard rock bands and headbanging. Zoltan Kuvari lives in Budapest in Hungary, and he's the lead singer of a band called The Trousers. And now, a few years ago, they won the prize for the best rock band in Hungary. And I want to say, listen, if you want to see a psychobiographer headbang, go to YouTube tonight and type in the trousers. You'll be surprised to see what psychobiographers do on stage, eh? Then James Anderson as well, and Elias Mpofu. Elias is the editor of the Journal of Psychology in Africa, and then lastly also James Simonton. Then on local soil, I would like to thank a few colleagues, and that is a precious opportunity for me to emphasize that there are certain people amongst my staff, our staff, the department, that have touched me in my research career. Doctors Pravani Naidu, Carla Nell. Unfortunately, she's lecturing the honours students, and that's why they're not here at the moment. So they apologized intensely and severely, saying that, please, this mustn't have a detrimental impact on my view of them. But they are in lectures, so their priorities are straight. Then Barbara Benel, Angela Panalatti, Monique Basson, and Elise Coetzee. And then all the postgraduate students and all the postgraduate colleagues who have undertaken and undertook research with me in the field of psychobiography. I really appreciate what you taught me. And I realize that there's always something to learn, even from a student in your field. The aim of the lecture tonight, I don't want to bore you with a lecture on the so-called procedures and steps of undertaking a psychobiographical research methodology or study or design or approach. My idea, I thought, was rather to, as objective, disclose certain information. Now, this information was gleaned over the past few weeks by me through very basic, elementary research called scoping research. I tried to see if I could find common patterns or themes that have emerged or are emerging in psychobiographical theses, dissertations, publications. And this scoping research is a precursor to a systematic review. It's not the same as a systematic review. It's very informal and elementary. But I don't want to make it too technical and bore you with technicalities. So we're going to be looking at these overarching markers or patterns that include features and traits and life events in the lives of eminent personalities who have been, for a better word, dissected psychologically from a psychological model or theory, and then also placed within a historical, cultural, economical context. It's important to realize that psychobiography is not just about psychology. It's an interdisciplinary field that includes history, and therefore they also refer to it as psycho-historical studies. So let's kick off by saying, what does it take to go down in history as a great or eminent personality? Greatness and eminence is relative and subjective. What I may view as eminent, you may not. It depends on what side of the fence you are standing. As Ronald Reagan once said, is one man's terrorist not maybe another man's freedom fighter? So at the end of the day, one has to realize we need to demarcate and conceptualize and operationalize greatness and eminence to make it a bit more scientific. And what we do, or what we did as psychobiographers worldwide, was to demarcate or define psychobiography as those eminent personalities who are viewed as distinguished, illustrious, famous, and at times even contentious and controversial. And they also had a significant impact on their immediate social environment or sphere of life. They had an impact on changing the world, and they also had an impact on their profession and craft. So these eminent personalities are all over the show. We can find them in various professions, ranging from military figures to the revolutionaries, the politicians, religious leaders and scientists, philosophers, artists, writers, and composers, as well as masters of their sport. In psychobiography, we have three broad categories into which so-called significant personalities are classified or placed or positioned. These categories are, however, not closed systems. They are diffuse. So some great individuals you will find in one category. Some are in two and others in three, depending on who they are and what they've done. But the emphasis is all about their significance to the world. First of all, we have the explorers. You may be one of them. The explorers work and function on the so-called curiosity motive. They are the innovators and the people with the new ideas. Examples, Leonardo da Vinci. You all know him as the painter of Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. But he was also an engineer and an architect and a sculptor and an anatomist and an inventor. In fact, he actually started inventing the helicopter. He was the first to invent the parachute. Significant indeed. Then you find people like Charles Darwin, father of evolutionary theory, Albert Einstein and his well-renowned quantum physics equation that says E equals mc squared. I really never knew what E equals mc squared meant. And I wonder how many of you do. I believe that you guys will know more than me. But it's energy equals mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. And so mass and light cannot exist without energy. Then we have Albert Einstein, which we spoke about, Eugene Marais on local soil. He was a very interesting fellow. He was actually a lawyer, but he decided to spend a lot of time in the veld. So he would spend time amongst termites. He would spend times, weeks, months, studying the apes in the northern parts of those days. It was called Transvaal, close to Limpopo. And he wrote two books. The one is The Soul of the Ape, and the other one, The Soul of the Termite, which were seen internationally as acclaimed works. Then we have Marie Curie. You all know her. She's the theoretical physicist, a Polish physicist. She immigrated to America. She was the inventor of the X-ray, and unfortunately she passed away due to a blood disease and also anemia, and this was the result of all the exposure to the radioactive material. Then we have people like our Facebook fellow called Mark Zuckerberg and also Steve Jobs, but I'm not going to speak about them right now. They will be spoken about a little bit later on. Who are the great and eminent personalities? The bottom line is they are distinguished, they're illustrious, they're famous, they're contentious, as we've already said. So I just wanted to recap on what the great personalities are. Let's move on to those categories that we spoke about. There's a second category, and that's the leaders. Most of you may be the leaders. You are mostly driven by the so-called power motive. You either use empowerment for your friend or disempowerment for your foe. And then, interesting enough, a common theme or a common marker or a common pattern that you find amongst leaders are they tend to challenge the status quo. Some psychobiographies that have been undertaken indicate these common markers or patterns. Some of these souls include people like Martin Luther King Jr., Steve Biko, Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama. Most people think the Dalai Lama is a name and a surname of someone, but there's already been 13 Dalai Lamas. The 14th one is called Tenzin Gyatso. He's the spiritual leader of Tibet. He was also a very close friend to Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Then Mahatma Gandhi, who was a Hindu advocate, he came to South Africa. He had peaceful protests. He was basically, at that stage, controversial. And then Christian Jan Smuts, who was the Prime Minister, had him jailed. And he, in jail, used the time to actually make a pair of slippers or sandals for Jan Smuts, to thank him for everything that he's learned from Jan Smuts. Then we have people like Emily Habeas, the anti-war campaigner, especially fighting for the rights of the women and the children in the Anglo-Boer War, who were in concentration camps. Albertina Sisulu, a pivotal leader in the field of servant leadership. Margaret Thatcher, she was termed the Iron Lady, and the reason for that is that she was uncompromising. The Russians totally feared her in discussion. And she was the only prime minister to have been elected 3 times in a row as Prime Minister of Britain. Saul Plaatje, you all know, who was one of the co-founders of the now ANC, and then Bram Fischer, who was a lawyer and defended some of these ANC leaders in the 60s at the Rivonia trials. Then we have the Visionaries. Now, some of you may rather fit into this category. The Visionaries are mostly driven by imagination and creativity. Examples are Walter Disney from Disney movies, Jane Austen, the English novelist, who with a bit of a tongue in the cheek mocked women for depending so much upon men for their quality of life and the patriarchy of society at that time. We have people like Brenda Fassie, the Kwaito singer, the social activist against apartheid. We have John Lennon, a member of the Beatles, a pacifist. Unfortunately, he was gunned down in front of his apartment. Helen Martins, the Owl House lady. For those of you who've been to New Bethesda, close to Graaff-Reinet, you'll see that there's a spot where there are many camels and owls staring at you with big eyes. She tended to enjoy sculpting owls and camels. Unfortunately, from the readings, we find that she suffered from severe depression. And we'll see later that she committed suicide by drinking caustic acid, a slow, painful death. Frida Kahlo, you know, the unibrowed Mexican surrealist painter. She suffered from a spinal injury and had to take a lot of painkillers. And unfortunately, one day she just could not cope with all the pain, and she overdosed on the painkillers and had an embolism as a result of that and passed away. Ingrid Jonker, you all know her, she's seen as equivalent to the Sylvia Plath of America. And then Roald Dahl. Who of you have watched Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Most of us. So, yeah, he's the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, books like Boy, Going Solo, etc. Then C.S. Lewis, a very interesting character, this C.S. Lewis. He was a writer, but also a lay theologian. And his best friend lived, or was born, in President Wright Street in the Hobbit Hotel. Who's that? Tolkien. Tolkien from Lord of the Rings. But we know that C.S. Lewis created works like the Chronicles of Narnia, and many other excellent child reading materials. Unfortunately, he passed away from cancer. So to dissect this eminent personality, we have to, at the end of the day, do a few things. And the one is you have to use a psychological theory or a model from which you dissect the person's personality from birth to passing away to death. And so it's a lifespan study. It's a case study, and it's a study that's longitudinal in nature. Important is the historical factors. We tend to, as psychologists, think that psychology can explain everything. Psychology cannot explain people. Psychology alone cannot. And so in psychobiography, we add the dimension of history. But the history is a generic term referring to politics, economy, culture, warfare, natural disasters, epidemics. All of those macro-systemic factors impact on the development of the persona or the personality and also their achievements. I call these factors the so-called chessboard factors. And more as we do psychobiographies, I come to realize that these chessboard factors are so important because it can put you at the right time on the right little block on the chessboard of life. And that could lead to the greatness. When there are international trends in psychobiography, one of these is that its popularity has grown exceptionally. And South African universities, especially UFS and UJ and the Nelson Mandela University, they are at this stage the academic stronghold of psychobiography in the so-called global south. There's also been more increased collaboration on an international level, ranging from Fordham University in New York all the way through to Beijing, and then all the way from Warsaw in Poland down to Budapest to visit Zoltan Kuvari, all the way down to Bloemfontein, all the way down to the old PE Ibai Kibera, and then all the way down to Queensland in Australia. So the South is catching up and doing more publications at this stage than the Northern psychobiographers. In South Africa, we have a trend, and there's a new trend. There's a trend towards understanding the humanity, the person behind the so-called anti-apartheid activist. We have a few completed psychobiographies in this field, and also a few that are close to completion. They are done on Brenda Fassie, Miriam Makeba, you all know Mama Africa, O.R. Tambo, Saul Plaatje, Aram Small, Bram Fischer, Steve Biko, Albertina Sissoudi, Joe Slover, Beyers Nordea, Ingrid Jonker, Helen Suzman. And I can go on with the list, but I thought I'm just going to emphasize some of those individuals that we all know best. So with the scoping research, we're basically looking at emerging themes and patterns and markers. But these patterns and markers are not definite. They still need to be tested further. So with this scoping research, we just identified emerging patterns and markers that need further investigation. Many of these markers or patterns you find correspond to the psychological patterns or markers of excellence identified by Professor Symington, a specialist in the field of intelligence, genes, and genius. Now let's get round to the bottom line of tonight's discussion. What are these common patterns or markers that are emerging? Have a look at the slide. On your left-hand side, you'll have one on genetics and the chromosome. Do you guys know the fellow in the middle? Even though he's bald, he may look a little bit like me, but it's not me. It's a fellow called Pablo Picasso, the father of the Cubist movement in art, also a printmaker. And his own father was a brilliant artist. And his own father taught him a lot about painting and art. Also interesting is that Salvador Dali was extremely jealous on the achievements of Pablo Picasso. They did not like one another. But Pablo Picasso got his genetic predisposition to art most likely from his family and his father in particular. Then we have Sebastian Bach, the German musician from the late Baroque. And the interesting thing, his father passed away and his mom passed away before he was 10. So he was orphaned before the age of 10, which put a lot of striving into him and responsibility to take care of the family as a caretaker. Unfortunately, he passed away, and at that stage, there was so much more talent left in him. It was at a stage not sure what he died from, but it appeared to also be a form of heart failure in combination of stroke. So the overarching factor here is genetics, genes and genius and intelligence. Now, genius seems to be clustered within certain distinguished family lines. And inheriting genius, is especially so-called creative genius, from a parent, provides you with a head start. It provides you with a head start to achieving extraordinary achievements and events in your life. Now we know there's a nature-nurture debate. Which one is more important? Is it the gene or is it the nurturing, the loving, the caretaking, the environment? And now we know that high-quality genes alone require to be unlocked. And from the scoping research, we realized that there are two important factors that came to the fore that unlock these genes of genius that you inherited. The one is quality education. The other one is so-called experienced mentorship. Mentorship, especially between the age of 20 and 35, is extremely important in your career. So, in terms of examples of these so-called creative geniuses, we have the Bach family line. And interesting, in his whole family, there was a whole group of well-renowned composers and musicians. We have Sir Francis Galton as well. He was a psychologist, he was a sociologist, he was a statistician, and he came from a family who were very intelligent as well. They were international bankers, and they were world-renowned entrepreneurs. And then, of course, Pablo Picasso, where his father played a huge role in his life, and then Steve Jobs. Now, a few people know that Steve Jobs was adopted. His biological mom and dad decided, when she fell pregnant, to have him adopted because they could not financially take care of Steve. He ended up with a fantastic family. But eventually he sought out, he wanted to find his biological father and mother. And the interesting thing, his father was a Syrian who immigrated to America. And his father, after Steve was already adopted, completed his own PhD before the age of 30 and became a quick-made, quick-fix multi-millionaire in a short period of time. His mother is still alive, but I hear, as I read and listen, that she's seriously ill and most likely going to pass away soon, is that she was an extremely important person in the allied health professions as well, and played a big role in the American allied health professions. There is a few more pictures. The one on your left-hand side, I received many years ago from Karel's father, Professor Estraser's father. That was Professor Estraser when he was taking a little cat nap. Very small fellow, but remarkable. We'll see why. In the middle, we have Einstein. You all know the typical hairstyle. And then the lady on your right, on my left, is Marissa Mayer. She was the former CEO of Yahoo. Now, here's a very interesting marker or pattern. The marker or pattern is extreme sleeping patterns. It seems like eminent and exceptional achievers have a habitual extreme sleeping pattern. They're either long-termed sleepers or short-termed sleepers. And now, the interesting one is why the opposites. There's opposite routes here to greatness. Interesting, they defined long-term sleepers as people who sleep about 10, 12 to 14 hours a night. Einstein was a long-term sleeper. He believed that he needed the REM sleep to help him to solve some of his quantum physical problems that he had with his research. So the more he slept, the more he believed he dreamt and found answers. Then we also have Marissa Mayer, who slept very short, 3 to 4 hours a night. Interesting, Napoleon Bonaparte, the French Napoleon, as you all know him, he slept 4 hours a night. He slept only from 12 to 2 in the morning. Then he would wake up and go back to sleep from 5 until 7. Then another interesting one is Leonardo da Vinci. Now, this is most likely a very huge exception to the rule. Leonardo only slept 2 hours a night. Only 2 hours. And then he had the habit of every 4 to 5 hours having a power nap of 20 minutes. So every 4 to 5 hours, he would take a little cat nap, a power nap, and then he would continue with his work. So interesting, these sleeping patterns that we find. Then we have the so-called glass or hourglass effect. On your right-hand side, or yeah, actually it's your left-hand side. I'm confusing myself with left and right. But the hourglass effect. Listen, in the middle there's a fellow called the Austrian Amadeus Mozart. You all know Amadeus Mozart. And Amadeus Mozart, at the age of 5, already composed his first musical piece. At the age of 3, he already started to play the piano. His father was his educator and mentor. And he would spend close on 3 to 8 hours a day having to play the piano. In his lifetime, he composed more than 600 musical compositions. He just kept producing. He just kept producing. Then we have an interesting fellow called Bobby Fischer. Some of you may know him from the 70s. He was eventually the world chess champion. At the age of 14, he won the United States Chess Championship. Why? Bobby Fischer started to play chess from the age of 4. His father and parents forced him to play chess for 5 to 6 hours during his primary school years. And then eventually, when he became an adolescent, he played between 12 to 16 hours of chess a day, either with people who were opponents, or if they could not win him anymore, he played against himself. Now, the unfortunate thing what happened here is that he eventually passed from the grid. We'll get to that a bit later. But I want to speak about another grit, which is a term from positive psychology, researched by Duckworth, and it's all about perseverance, passion, and practice. They say if you want to become a famous and respected person in a particular profession, you need to be a grandmaster. And to become a grandmaster, you have to exercise and practice for at least 10,000 hours in that particular field. It could be sport, it could be chess. But we also find it amongst some top researchers at universities. We find it amongst top businessmen, top entrepreneurs as well. So it's involvement in that activity that counts. 10,000 hours is a lot. It's also confirmed by the work of Malcolm Gladwell. I think you all read the book Outliers, and then also by Dean Simonton's research. And that's why I refer to the example of Mozart and Bobby Fischer. Bobby Fischer, after he won the American Chess Championship, he could no longer cope with the fame and the paparazzi and the media. And he appeared off the grid, and no one knew where to find him. Some people thought he passed away. Some people thought he was hiding in the Rocky Mountains. Other people thought he was abducted by the Russians at that stage. And years later, they found an old man in Reykjavik in Greenland who lived all by himself. And he was Bobby Fischer. And he died from renal failure. But before that, they tried to decipher why did he disappear off the grid from the world international chess limelight. They found out he developed social phobia because of all the attention he got. The social phobia complicated and awoken and unlocked certain genetics, and he developed a paranoid personality disorder. And because of that, he disappeared off the grid. So some great people don't want to be noticed. One wonders how many there are out there. I know of a Terence Tao, who at this stage in the world is seen as the most intelligent man. He's from Hong Kong. He immigrated to America. He works at the University of California, Los Angeles, and he has an IQ of 230. Seen as the most intelligent person on the planet. Interesting enough, Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking never had their IQs formally tested, but it's estimated that their IQs were around 160. So Terence Tao is far above. Keep your eye on Terence Tao. Then we have another marker. What is that? Yeah, we have Albertina Sisulu, Mother Teresa, and then the infamous Adolf Hitler. And this is all about leadership. How do you become a great leader? The interesting thing is they say, once again, we have opposites. Just like in the steeping patterns, here we also have opposites. The opposites in this case is that of, do you want to become a famous leader, a good leader, a civil leader, or do you want to be a so-called coercive leader? Now, those who choose the path of civility follow the route of so-called servant leadership. They employ justice, mercy, humility, empowerment. Examples of people like Gandhi, Albertina Sisulu, and Mother Teresa. When you find those who take the path of coercion, the so-called authoritarians, they employ force, oppression, they lack empathy, they like to disempower their foe. Example is the infamous Adolf Hitler. So those of you who are in the leadership positions, we hope you take the route of civility. We're nearly finished. There's another marker. You all have heard about the type A personality versus the type B personality. I prefer to call it the type A behavioral pattern versus the type B behavioral pattern. The type A person is the person who just keeps going. They are very involved with time. Time is one of their biggest virtues. So they try to do more and more in less and less time. They also speak fast, walk fast, do things fast, and do it effectively. They're very driven, and they're very competitive. And if you compare that and I envy these souls, the type B personality. They are the so-called beachcombers, or those who are the procrastinators. They take it easy. And now the interesting thing, unfortunately, is that if you want to make it big, if you want to gain greatness and eminence, especially in the field of entrepreneurship, business, politics, warfare, you need to be a type A. Also, the same applies to academics. If you want to become a top researcher, the best in your field, you need to keep producing article after article after article, book after book after book. Don't stop. Keep going. The motto here is success lies in keep going. Professor Vatun, I hope you don't encourage us all to go the route of the type A behavior pattern. Examples. Look at Sigmund Freud. He published about 330 articles and books. In today's term, it's not a lot, but in those years, it was superb. Thomas Edison obtained nearly 1,093 patents. Pablo Picasso, in his career, he created approximately 20,000 works during his lifetime. Painting after painting after painting. Just keep going. Now a sad one. You'll see it looks like a messy sketch. It's actually a canvas. They call it drip art, or they also call it action or kinetic art. Now this was an invention by Jackson Pollock from America. And Jackson Pollock did a lot of this canvassing work, the drip art. Unfortunately, he suffered from severe depression throughout his life. He was never happy. And he became an alcoholic, and he died from a motor vehicle accident, and it was claimed he was intoxicated at the time. The same applies to Virginia Woolf. You know Virginia Woolf, the American novelist? She suffered from severe bipolar mood disorder, and this was triggered after the death of her mother at a very young age. And she continually suffered and tried to struggle through the depression, but never got through it. Eventually, she decided to drown herself. So she put on a jacket, and she put huge boulders and stones into her pockets, and she walked into the close nearby river and drowned herself. What's the common marker? Have you all heard of the saying, there's genius in the madness and madness in the genius? And what this is all about is the so-called psychopathology or mental illness that comes at the cost of greatness and eminence. They say that the intense and the frequent strain that accompanies greatness and the illustrious producing, achieving personality takes these personalities who are sitting on the edge of normality and pushes them over the edge, pushes them into mental illness, especially affective disorders, especially your bipolar mood type of disorders, and also suicide. So mental illness can be an unsought penalty for being an eminent creative genius. So mental illness seems to be brought about by the stress and strain of fame, being great. And this is especially found in families where there's a genetic predisposition to a certain mental illness. Examples, Virginia Woolf, we spoke about. Jackson Pollock, we spoke about. Helen Martins, the Ale House lady, she unfortunately, it was claimed, had an abortion at a very young age. She lived with extreme guilt for the rest of her life. And she developed depression, but she also couldn't get rid of. She tried all types of medications and saw doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists. It didn't work. And so she committed suicide. And then Brenda Fassie, the kwaito singer, she also overdosed on drugs and medication. She suffered from asthma, and the overdose basically triggered the asthma, and she died as a result. Then the overarching markers, here are three in a row. Here we have a lady reading a book to kids. In the middle we have Mother Nature, and then we have the topic, unfortunately, of death. What did we find in the scoping research? Again, emerging patterns. It seems like great and eminent individuals from a young age have a very intense sense of curiosity. And so they love reading from a very young age. Also, a fondness of nature, a near-pantheistic type of lifestyle. Also, a sense of the sacredness of the cosmos, of the universe. But this we only found in cases where people took the civil route of greatness. Those who took the route of coercion, authoritarianism, they did not have a sense of sacredness for the universe. And then interesting, parental loss, or the abandonment of a parent before you reach puberty. It pushes some people into the position of taking responsibility for their siblings. So it pushes them into a leadership position. We find this is very career-specific or profession-specific. Some of your best and most renowned entrepreneurs, businessmen, people in the military, politicians, are usually individuals who have underwent this life event. Then there's one last little topic here, and this is all about conformity. Do great individuals tend to conform, or don't they? And I think your guess is correct. They are unconventional. They live unconventional lifestyles. Creativity and eminence are linked to independence, autonomy, anti-conformity, anti-mediocrity, extraordinariness. Examples are Leonardo da Vinci, who lived a very extraordinary life, Marlene Dietrich, the German-American actress. Unfortunately, she liked to be entertained. She was a huge socialite, and she had various personality disturbances and disorders. Then, those of you who lived in the 80s and the 90s will know Rolf Raby. Rolf Raby was an author. His other name was Johannes Kerkorrel. And him and a guy called Koos Kombuis, they visited the universities, especially the Afrikaner universities, and they tried to, with their music, convince the students to stand up against apartheid. And that was called the Voelvry Beweging, Be Free Like a Bird movement. Then Eugene Marais, we spoke about Eugene, the guy who lived in the veld a lot. Unfortunately, he was addicted to morphine. Those of you who saw the movie The Wonderwerker, that's a very nice synoptic version of his life. He reached a point where no one wanted to supply him with any morphine. And then he went to a friend of his house, and he asked if he could borrow a shotgun because there was a snake in the kitchen. On the way to his house, he shot himself in the chest, and he did not die. And so he had to repeat the procedure, and eventually Eugene passed away. Then we have people like Heath Ledger. The modern young people will know about Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger played in the Batman movie The Dark Knight. He was the Joker. And Heath Ledger suffered from intense introversion, and he was a hermit. And he spent a huge amount of energy every time he needed to act on being an extrovert, but he was not an extrovert. We know that, for example, when they filmed The Dark Knight, he locked himself in his apartment and hotel room for days on end. And he lived basically just on medication that he took. And he tried to live himself into the role of the Joker. Unfortunately, he overdosed. Some say it was suicide, others say it was just accidental overdose, and passed it on. And then Salvador Dali, a surreal artist. You'll know the fellow with the little moustache that's called a Spanish artist. And he was very, as I said, jealous upon Pablo Picasso. But Salvador Dali suffered from depression, severe depression as well. And he had sexual perversions, which because of some of you being below the age of 18, I don't want to go into. But yes, he passed away eventually also from heart failure. So to conclude, not all these markers or patterns are present in all people of eminence. And one or two markers are not going to make you great and eminent. So certain markers seem to be more profession or career specific. And that needs to be investigated further. However, there's one prominent marker, and we all have it. Alfred Adler, a psychologist, said that all of us suffer from some form of organ inferiority. It was a metaphorical term to say that either anatomically or physiologically you have something that's going wrong, and to compensate for that, you put all your energy into your strengths. Now, in the case of greatness and eminence, we found that these people who achieved greatness and eminence had a much more intense experience of this so-called organ inferiority. They either had an embodied deformity, like Frida Kahlo and a spine, and they had a sense of shortcoming, a sense of guilt, a sense of shame. And they compensated for that by trying to achieve superiority and excellence in their specific field. Lastly, the chessboard factors. Now, this is being at the right place at the right time. I wonder what will happen with the term greatness and eminence in the future, in the fifth industrial revolution. We're already moving into it at a very fast pace. And the fifth industrial revolution is all about dovetailing humanity with robotics, especially AI, artificial robotics, so that we can make the evolutionary jump from being Homo sapiens sapiens to becoming Homo roboticus. That's a nice idea to think of, but for many people, the anti-transhumanists who are against this, they would say, no, human beings are going to be redundant in the workplace because their jobs are going to be taken over by this AI robotics. And so we, as human beings, have to stay alert. And the three things that keep us alert and keep us creating and developing into greatness and eminence is our sense of curiosity, our ability to innovate, and our creativity. Ladies and gents, I hope I gave you a taste of what greatness and eminence is all about in terms of common factors, but they still need further testing, further experimentation, more research done on them. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that it's quite a fascinating lecture that Professor Fouché has given us. And it's also reflective in terms of the dynamic stature of psychobiographies, bringing together psychological theory through a historical lens, provide a unique picture of personalities as well. And it really, in terms of, makes psychology and the science come alive in terms of these personalities then as well. And this is reflective in terms of the growth of psychobiography within South Africa, within the international context as well. If one looks back in history, in the development of psychobiographies in South Africa, there's a couple of names that will stand out. Roel van Niekerk that Prof Fouché mentioned from the University of Nelson Mandela, but also himself, because he's quite modest in terms of reflecting on terms of his work within psychobiographies as well. The Dean, Professor Hudson, mentioned some of the research that was done from his CV as well. And this has contributed to the field of psychobiography and the development of psychobiography over the years as well. And we are grateful and we are thankful that Professor Fouché is actually in our department as well and will continue with this research in developing this field within South Africa as well. It gives me great pleasure to just do a couple of things to people as well. Madam Vice Rector, Professor Hudson, members of the Rectorate that have joined us online, members of Council as well, Madam Dean, Professor Heidi Hudson, members of the department, students, other prominent members that have joined us online as well. We are grateful for your presence here tonight to come and enjoy and celebrate actually the academic achievement of Professor Fouché as well. But we also need to thank Professor Fouché, with whom this night would not have been possible as well. Thank you for the work and thank you for the hard work that you put into your research as well. I was listening to the factors that you've highlighted as with eminent persons, and I could identify a couple of those factors or a couple of those personality traits within you as well. Then we want to also thank Rochelle and your two daughters as well. Thank you for lending Professor Fouché to us as well and to the academia as well. I know it's not always easy in terms of the late nights, not seeing him being in his study, working away as well. But we also want to congratulate you as well in terms of this achievement that he's reached as well. I want to just invite guests here within the auditorium. There will be refreshments served in the foyer. So you're more than welcome to join us for some tea, some refreshments then as well. I also just want to ask you to remain seated just for a moment, as Professor Fouché and Rochelle will just take the place just at the steps to allow members of the audience to congratulate Professor Fouché. Thank you very much for your attendance.